Our first guest is Greg Edelman, who is an Associate Director of Admissions at Carnegie Mellon, and then my sister, Holly Archinal, who is the CEO and founder of Brainiacs.
My name is Greg Edelman. I'm one of the Associate Directors of Admission at Carnegie Mellon, so thanks very much for having me out. I've been at Carnegie Mellon for about 13 years. Primary responsibilities in the office are, I'm not necessarily visiting a lot of high schools or going to college fairs. It's not something that we do a whole lot of. I coordinate our financial aid efforts, so I'm guessing that's probably one of the reasons why I'm here. One of our main financial aid people, as well as oversee the whole process of reading the applications. So Carnegie Mellon this last year, for this coming year, we're expecting about 37,000 applications. We'll have a freshman class of about 1,400. So we've definitely moved into that highly selective category, and definitely happy to answer any questions you might have about the process.
And I'm Newland's sister, Holly Archinal, and I have been tutoring the SATs and ACTs and GMATs and LSATs for over 20 years. I came by it accidentally. I was an athlete and blew out my knees and suddenly ended up jobless and lifeless. And so she was getting tutored, and I sat in, and suddenly we were off to the races. And it was sort of my faithful friend. It was never planned that I would spend my life getting people higher scores on tests, but turns out I'm pretty okay at it. And so it's been the thing that's put the roof over my head, and I have had everyone from people without sixth sense to rub together to the corporate raiders of America's children who fly me around. It is an eye-opening experience, and it's fabulous, but in the end of the day, you realize that it's an interesting playing field, and I've seen everything. So if you have questions about everything, I could probably answer them.
I'm going to start off with just a couple of questions that I'm going to get into generically, and then we're going to have you ask questions. So, I found interesting, Greg, was this whole thing you were talking about, the fact that you're getting so many applications, but it sounds to me like you're taking fewer than 10% of those applications, and you're looking at them individually. What does somebody have to do to stand out to get into a school like CMU today?
Sure. So for the more competitive schools, academics don't select you. Not having the strong academics will deselect you. So as we'll hear a little bit about the SATs, for the more selective schools, the SAT math section goes up to Algebra 2 with a little bit of pre-calc. The majority of our students are in classes like BC Calc, differential equations, multivariable. So they're in a far higher level math than what the SAT is testing. So strong SATs, they're par for the course. So I would say about 80% of our students will fall into this category of being admissible. They have the academics, they have the SATs, they can do the work. Strong students bring you to the table, but ultimately being a good roommate is what's going to get you through the door. So to steal a phrase from I wish I could take credit for this, from the Dean of Admission at Princeton, she says they're looking for distinguishing excellence. You'll hear buzzwords like well-rounded and unique. We don't want 1,400 well-rounded kids in the freshman class. We want the freshman class as a whole to be well-rounded. And sometimes, too, students spend a lot of time telling us what they think we want to hear. If everyone that told us they did Habitat for Humanity actually did Habitat for Humanity, there'd be no homeless problem anywhere in the world. But everyone thinks Friday night, we got to go build houses. And in reality, very few people actually are passionate about that, and they end up doing that. So if you love Habitat for Humanity, by all means do it. But don't try and tell us what you think it is we want to hear. We're going to have people that do Habitat for Humanity. We're going to have class presidents. We're going to have captain of the football teams. But you're the only student here, so I'm going to pick on you. But the only way we're going to have a you is if you apply, right? So you want to be as true to yourself as you possibly can be. And at the end of the day, picking a college is like a relationship. We have to want you, you have to want us. And if neither one of us wants the other person, it's probably not a good fit in the long run.
So, Holly and I have had this conversation about how the dynamics have changed, and that it used to be, like you said, you did Habitat for Humanity, you went over to a third world country, and you helped out on some sort of mission trip. Now you're looking, my understanding is, for the student who had a passion at an early age and exhibited that all the way through. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, my favorite example is he's currently a junior. We have the world champion orchid grower in the male subdivision, ages 16 to 18. We got him, right? He's here, right? And why that's neat for us is guaranteed sometime over the next 4 years, somebody's going to learn how to grow orchids because that kid's on campus. Yeah. So, that's what we're looking for. That's what he was passionate about. And, No guidebook's going to tell you to grow flowers, and we don't want 1,400 kids that grow flowers, but we want a couple. And we want students that are going to impact one another. So that passion, the word passion is the big buzzword in college. Whatever you're passionate about, be proud of it and own up to it and talk about it in the admission process.
Okay. Holly, talk a little bit about the SAT, because there have been, if most of you have younger kids, there have been so many iterations of the SAT. The test has changed over the last 10 years. So talk a little bit about what the test is like today.
Okay, so to give a wee bit of backstory, it was originally formulated for Ivy League schools and their ilk, and it measured something very definitive about what kind of education you'd had. It compared known schools like a Lawrenceville or a Choate, these big boarding schools on the East Coast, up against things on the West Coast. And so it was really about the knowledge you'd accumulated over time. At some point in time, they needed to make it a little less specifically for these specialized private schools. And so it had to be able to take fits from inner cities and from rural areas that obviously hadn't had the same education. And so they changed it up probably in the 70s, to become much more a test of how big your vocabulary was, how hard you could concentrate, and a little bit how much you could think outside the box. And like he was saying, the math isn't advanced math. I tell all of my kids, hey, that's 7th, 8th grade math. The pre-calc is a wink at pre-calc. It's a parabola with no numbers on it. I mean, it's absolutely comical. So it's highly beatable, but it measures something very specific. It measures how analytical you are, if you can see patterns, can you see big picture and little picture at the same time, which is surprisingly, you would think that would be a simple thing with human beings, but in fact it's not. Most people either see the big picture or they focus on minutia. So that crossbreeding is really interesting. In the same way, ACTs measure minutia. Can you do minutia quickly? How speedily do you process information? Because that's really what the ACT measures. You don't need a big vocabulary. You don't need anything other than the most basic high school education, but it's more math-centric. You are actually doing pre-calc. You're actually doing algebra 2. The numbers are really numbers. There are short ways out of things, but it's more truly math-based. Now, for the people with younger kids, all this is about to change, and SATs are about to become a very different test all over again. They dumbed them down about 10 years ago to the point where it was actually embarrassing, and the scores were, in my opinion, close to meaningless. And then they, about 4 years ago, popped it back up again and made it a more difficult test. But the fact of the matter is, the new guy on board is the creator of something called Core Curriculum, and his new thing is that there should be no words on it that you wouldn't hear in your daily life, which, when they've given samples, are actually depressingly easy. I don't even know who would be bamboozled by it above 8th grade. So they're keeping the math fairly the same. Well, now we've got 8th grade math, so that's highly beatable. So it'll be an interesting time where ACTs maybe become the more accepted test, just out of the fact that the English on the SATs will become largely about document-based reading. And the only schools that I've come up against that teach you how to decipher document-based reading of historical documents tend to be your really, really good private schools. So in the end of the day, he's trying to make this a test that's friendly to inner city kids, and that has really been his drive, is to speak to those kids. And I'm nervous about it, not necessarily measuring up to that, but that said, I think it will level the playing field between SAT and ACT and give them equal measure.
One last question, then I'm going to pass the mic around. Which is more desired? Because I get this question from parents all the time who find out my relationship to Holly, ACT or SAT?
It's very, very regional. If you're in the Chicagoland area, it's almost all the ACT, and Chicagoland anymore extends a third of the country. Northeast California, it's largely the SAT. So this year we actually received more students that took the ACT than the SAT. It was like 52% to 48%. We weigh them exactly the same. As you said, they're testing the same thing, just in different ways. Yeah, but it doesn't really matter to us.
So is there one that's better?
No, they're just totally different measures. And I've told every one of my clients, take them both. Figure out, it's like throwing spaghetti at a wall, which is a cliche that now most kids don't know, where you're cooking spaghetti and you throw it in the wall. If it sticks, it works, and if it doesn't stick, it's not done. And so basically, if you're somebody who likes minutia, who likes math, who likes chemistry, who likes things by the book and no tricks, then the ACT is probably your test. If you process information pretty quickly, it's your test. You don't need high hours of preparation. But it's not terribly beatable because there's only so quickly you can process information. There's only so much you can change that as an individual. And does it measure whether or not you're the smartest? Not necessarily. There's some people who process things incredibly slowly, some with learning disabilities that they absolutely process slowly, and they're brilliant. There are other, in the SAT, it's all about, can you think outside the box? Can you be kind of weaselly? Well, again, that's a different thing, but whichever person you are, that's the one you go with. The one you are doing better on is the one that that you take. In sort of my experience, the SAT is the one where you can work consistently at it and you can actually change your scores, where the ACT doesn't always happen.
The nice thing about the SAT is the majority of schools will do what's called super scoring. So if you take the SAT multiple times, they'll take the highest section. They'll take the highest verbal or critical reading, the highest math, and the highest writing to give you the highest possible score. The ACT, that's not how it works, because the composite score is a calculation of all the other subscores. So to break it apart really doesn't make a lot of sense. So you get the highest composite regardless of what your subscores are. And schools pay close attention to the subscores.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm going to open it up to questions. Anybody have the first question? Here. David, let me bring. Oops.
Just hold it up.
Yeah, just hold it.
So back in the Stone Ages, when I was applying to college, there were a lot of schools that only took the ACT or the SAT. I know my high school was out west. Everybody took the ACT in the cafeteria on Saturday morning, and about 20 of us took the SAT over at the university in a classroom on a different Saturday morning. Is that still common, or is it reasonable to say any school is going to look at both now?
This is mine. I think most schools are going to look at both. I can't think of any school that's exclusively SAT or ACT. I think what you're starting to see increasingly more of is schools that are saying we don't care if you take either one. So they're going to go SAT or ACT optional. That's becoming more of a fad with some liberal arts schools. The STEM schools, more quantitative schools, we just want to see a test that shows your ability without necessarily caring if it's the SAT or the ACT.
Can I add to that? Ask a question. Maybe you could add to this, that the subject tests are sort of an interesting, especially for highly competitive, an interesting substitute for SATs and ACTs. And what's your take on that?
Where you sit is where you stand. So a lot of schools will allow, if you took the SAT and the ACT, you don't have to take subject test. We require the subject test for every applicant, regardless of whether or not they took the SAT or the ACT, just because it's another data point. And when you're into the more selective schools, the more data points you have, the better.
And for those of parents who don't know what subject tests are?
You can probably articulate.
They're called SAT-2s. They are 1-hour subject-based tests. They're sort of a small group that you can take, but math, sciences, languages, and they are measuring more your academic prowess in that particular subject. So if you're great at language, it's your way of having a high number that says, hey, this backs up my academic report card.
Any other questions? Everyone's writing. I'll ask a question. Is it okay to be average? Can you get into a school like CMU if you're not a great test taker? But say I do well in school and I've got a 4.0 GPA, but the SAT, I might not have the attention span to knock out a good score. But otherwise, I'm an excellent student. What do you do?
So we definitely care more about 4 years than 4 hours, or 3 hours and 45 minutes, whatever it was. So high school performance is definitely the most important thing. We want to see a sustained commitment to your academics. To be honest, it's much, much better to be a good student and not a great test taker than it is to be a great test taker and not a good student, because that just shows that you have potential that you're not necessarily working up towards. So I would say most of the competitive schools look at 3 things: standardized testing, involvement in the classroom, or performance in the classroom and involvement outside of the classroom. You really only have to be really, really good in 2 of the 3. A lot of students, if they're not great test takers, they write their essay about how they're not a great test taker. Don't do that. Don't draw our attention towards the negatives. Focus on the positives. So if you're not a great test taker but great in the classroom and super involved outside the classroom, just make sure that that's what we see.
Okay. Holly, talk a little bit about what if you have a child who has a learning disability, because I know you've had some expertise at working with kids who maybe, for them, it's difficult to sit through the length of the SAT and really focus.
So this one's a difficult question because it's so case specific, but when you have somebody with a learning disability, the SAT tends to be a whole lot more accommodating. They will really bend over backwards, and I have seen everything at this point, from the boy who had to get up every 10 minutes to actually eat and walk, which is insane to me, but they accommodated him and gave him a special room, and it took him 7 or 8 hours to get through the SATs, but he had it. The most common one is just extended time, where they turn a 4-hour test into basically 6.5, and that's a long time to sit there, but there's accommodation for everything. And I think in the end of the day, if you have somebody with a learning disability, there are accommodations. If you have a long-term learning disability, ACT will accommodate you, but they're pretty skittish about it because, honestly, they are simply a race against the clock. And so by giving someone extended time, you've given them the keys to the kingdom, because it's not anything they don't know. It's very simplistic reading. It's very straightforward math. So if you have all the time in the world, you can do quite well. That said, learning disability, I think, used to be sort of the kiss of death, and now there's so many people who've been diagnosed, and it's not that uncommon that it just isn't the kiss of death. And some of my most brilliant students are kids with some hardcore learning disabilities, really hardcore, and they are people who are going to invent things. We're going to set the world on fire, so it doesn't have the same meaning it used to.
Is that you?
I have a question. Actually, I did have a learning disability when I was younger. And I learned that learning disabilities basically doesn't mean a lack of intelligence. It just means you learn in a different way. So you got to find out how you learn. In talking to a lot of my clients, they have a kid that's gone through high school, done pretty well. They're getting to midway part of their junior year, and all of a sudden they say, oh, we got to be in the play now, or we got to play baseball, or we got to do this. What if a student hasn't done some of the community activities or whatever? Are there certain things that they should do in their last year, or should they just present themselves as they are and not fake it?
Absolutely, just present yourself the way you are. It becomes painfully obvious in the admission process when students are trying to do activities just to get into college. 9th grade, they didn't do anything. 10th grade, they didn't do anything. 11th grade, 30 different clubs and organizations, and they're involved in it for an hour at a time. So, yeah, I would say just be as true to yourself as you can be and present yourself in that way.
Any other questions?
I'm sorry, real quick. I'm sorry, excuse me. Because a lot of times students try and limit their activities on their college application to what they do in the classroom. And I interviewed a kid one time, and he showed up in the suit, and he was going to tell me what he wanted to tell me regardless of whether or not I asked the question. And I literally said to him, what do you do for fun? He said, National Honor Society. I'm like, okay. I said, so tell me about significant responsibility that you have. And he said, well, I'm president of the dance club. And then he went like that with his head. Like I was supposed to be really impressed. He was president of the dance club. And it turns out, as we started talking and he loosened up a little bit, he's a nationally ranked rock climber. And he babysits his younger brother and sister until both of his parents get home from school or home from work. But when I said, tell me about significant responsibility, he said, literally, I order the streamers for the dances. But he never mentioned that he babysits both siblings until his parents get home. So the activities that you can present in a college application are not limited to the activities that a school has available to you. It can be anything that you do outside of the classroom, at home. Everybody has a passion. Just tell us what that passion
Don't
is.
you think that's the big misconception is parents think, okay, if we are in the dance club and we're this, that's what the college is looking for. But what you're telling me is like the guy that grows orchids or the kid who has a great hobby interest outside of the educational stuff, that's still educational or whatever, but that's almost as important as anything he would do within like the Honor Society or anything else.
If not more so, yeah.
Really, that's interesting.
My question is for Holly. How soon do you start preparing for the SAT and the ACT? It seems like, kids going into in middle school I'm hearing now are starting to prepare for these tests, and I don't know what the guidelines are.
So this is actually a great question because outside of Philadelphia, I think everybody's a little bit less cranked up in Pittsburgh, which is a good thing. That's not a bad thing. But where I am, people are crazy. And I'm sure this is going to get on something else, suddenly be on YouTube, and these people will identify themselves. But I literally have had people who have come to me in 5th and 6th grade, and they look at me and they say, they're going to have to be in a really good school, and we're getting started now. And amazingly, those guys, it has worked out. But I did have a child who, his parents had emigrated from India, and in 7th grade he had straight 800s. And so that's, to me, that's maybe a little too early. I'm a big believer in, like, treat it as something normal. It's not a big deal. I think the bigger deal you make, the less healthy it is, and the more they sort of freak out in the test center. So I think really the time you want to start to focus on it is that summer between sophomore and junior year, and just get your feet wet. Right going to junior year when you're going to be looking at the PSATs, and I don't know if that every school out here has this, but you can take the PSATs the first time in 10th grade. Nobody's really looking at those scores. Nobody really cares, but it's an opportunity for you to get your feet wet, see what you're going to be up against, and not care about it. And then tackle the word building and some practice tests going into your junior year. And then take it again a final time, October of your senior year. I feel the ACTs, you can wait a little bit longer because some of the pre-calc, depending on how far ahead your child is in math, some of the pre-calc comes up in the end of the test, the last questions on the ACT. And that's stuff you don't learn until junior year for a lot of schools if you're just regular track math person. So it's student dependent and it's test dependent, but I'd say don't get cranked up really until you're sort of heading into junior year. If you want to start over the summer before junior year.
One question. Is there an ideal time to take the SAT? Should it be over, they give it in the summer, don't they? Or is it May? The last one in May? But what time would you recommend? Because everybody gets into their sports and school, and they're trying to do AP classes, and they're stressed out. When's a good time to sit down and try to do it when the stress is?
So when I'm building an SAT schedule for people, I tell juniors, if they've started in that summer before junior year, that you want to look to take it sometime around the PSAT, because the PSAT can be used sort of as a practice run. So either October, November, December of your junior year, that's your first strike. You can tell me whether or not this is right or not, but I tell them really 3-4 times maximum you want to take this test. Any more, and you're going to look a little desperate, and I don't know that your scores change that much with multiple takes. You start repetition.
What does that mean? Does that mean you?
Yes or no? Yes or
No. So a follow-up question for you, but I also have another point. So the College Board has these stats out there. Statistically, first time to second time, score goes up about 140 points. Second to third, third to fourth, there's no statistical evidence that your score is going to go up beyond that. So I think we see a lot of students that probably take it 3 times. Because there's also something out there called score choice, which the College Board in all their wisdom said students have the ability to decide which scores they want to have sent to the schools, but the schools have the right to deny that request. So we're denying the request for score choice. So we want to see every iteration of the test that you took. And it's not necessarily as big of an issue in the domestic market, but overseas, the SATs can be learned, and students take them over and over and over and over again, and they learn the tricks. And they learn the test, and you see their score going up, not necessarily because they're more prepared, but they've learned how to take the test. Which brings me to my question for you. The new SAT is only counting right answers. It's not subtracting for negative answers, and it's not decreasing the bottom line for skipped questions. Do you think that's going to impact how people prepare for the test?
Probably. My guess would be, the SAT is this wonderful dance where you figure out it plays on craftiness and, okay, where's my break point for getting a question right? What's my chance of getting this? And the ability to make a wise decision. I'm not getting this right. It's going to eat up my score. I'm walking away. There's something very healthy about that. Where the ACT lets you do everything and nothing counts against you, but you get really wrapped down in getting everything right because it's not counting against you, but I'd like to get this right. And so I think it will impact the scores. I think people will get in that same headspace where they're doing a little much work. They're not having that healthy sort of inner dialogue where they think, you know what, this isn't going to work out for me. Let me move on. I can always come back to this. And there's something very, very healthy about that ability, because in real life, you do get to meet a problem and you can come back to it a little bit later and approach it. And I think you'll get people living in a space where they're going to try and get everything right. And I don't necessarily know that that's going to impact the scores in a positive way. You can tell me if you agree with that.
Only you could describe the SAT as a wonderful dance. Most kids would not describe it that way. When should a child, a parent of a child, start honing in on a couple of schools and the kids that say they want to apply to like 14 different schools, and then always there's the popular school within the high school. Everybody's going to North Carolina, so I need to go to North Carolina. What would you say to a parent to try to not only get across the cost of college education to a child, that they aren't, can't spend millions and millions and millions all the time, but trying to find a school that's right for that individual child, not what happens to be the popular school within the high school? Because every high school, there's like, oh, I got to go to North Carolina because Johnny's going to North Carolina.
No, that's a great question. So you should be in high school, definitely. We get calls too from the 4th or 5th grade parent that says, we need to, oh, it's amazing. Well, I've literally told a parent, tell your kid to go play in the sandbox for a couple years and then come back and talk to us about it. Because the schools, there are 4,000 high schools in the United States. By comparison, there's 400 in Canada. Now, granted, we're a much larger country than Canada, but 10 times as many schools is pretty ridiculous. And you're absolutely right. It's all about fit. So we have a great computer science program, to tell you a little anecdote. And I ask computer science students all the time, what are the best computer science schools in the country? And inevitably, they say Carnegie Mellon and Stanford and MIT and Caltech and Berkeley. But the University of Illinois is hands down one of the best computer science schools in the country. But A, it's not expensive, and B, it's not hard to get into. So it can't be good in their eyes, but it is easily one of the best schools in the country. So two things. I oftentimes will tell the parent, the College Board, I think it's the College Board, has a great resource where you can say, I'm interested in this, I want to live here, and it will spit back a bunch of schools that fit your profile. And sometimes, too, I'll tell parents or the students, if you want to work for Google one day, call Google. I mean, they'll be more than happy to talk to you and say, listen, I'm a 16-year-old high school student. My ultimate goal is to work for you. How do I get there? And you'd be amazed. If you ask high school students the best computer science schools in the country, you'll get one answer. If you ask Google, you're going to get some crossover, but you're going to get an entirely different list of schools. College guidebooks are a great resource. Guidance counselors are a fantastic resource, but students definitely kind of need to do their own homework as well. And I can tell you too, when it comes to call-in schools, it benefits the student in the application process tremendously if the student's the one that's initiating the phone calls and the questions and not necessarily the parents. So,
Any other questions before I dig in some more? What's the worst essay you ever read,
Oh, okay,
and
so-
what's the best?
yeah. So I actually I have a whole presentation. I travel around the country giving presentations on essays. I think the worst essay that I ever read was so if you're funny, be funny. If you're serious, be serious. Don't try and be something that you're not. A student one time wrote his essay about the 3 stages of matter and how it relates to the human body, and he wrote a 2-page essay, excuse my language, about solid, liquid, and gas for the human body, about pooping, peeing, and passing gas. And that was his essay. And he somehow thought that would be a great essay when he applied to colleges. The all-time best essay, I won't tell you the whole story because I can pretty much say it verbatim at this point, was a kid that he was applying to us for engineering, and he and his friend were playing a video game, and they wanted to have a contest to see. They were playing the video game because they wanted to see who was the better man, and it was a fighting video game, and they thought that whoever won the virtual fight was the better man, and then they realized that's ridiculous. So then they did the next best logical thing, and they hit golf balls in the backyard, and whoever hit the golf ball the farthest was the better man. And then they realized they had to walk after the golf ball to see who hit it the farthest, and so we're not going to do that anymore. So the kid that was applying to us said, I'm going to lay down on the ground and let you hit the golf ball out of my mouth. And his friend immediately jumped on that opportunity, but left a divot in his face about right here, shattered his nose, and the whole essay is about going to the emergency room and the doctor saying if we don't fix your nose bone could grow into your brain and you could die. And it went on and on and on, and he ended it by saying, if I'm ever late for class, it's not because I overslept, it's because my nose bone grew into my brain and I died. And it was the reason why it was such a good essay is because nowhere in the application do we say, "Are you an idiot?" Yes, I am. It offered unique information that we couldn't see anywhere else in the application. This is a kid that got so bored in life, he let his friend hit him in the nose with a golf club. So imagine if he was in a highly competitive environment with clubs and organizations. It was incredibly well written. It was funny, and it showed us his personality.
I think only somebody like you would see that because the rest of us would say, this guy's an idiot.
Oh, it was fantastic.
Did he get in?
Oh yeah.
See, so there's hope for us.
He got in.
What's his major?
Oh, I don't remember what his major was. I think he was in the humanities college. Yeah, I think he actually was. Oh no, he was engineering. Yeah, he was within the engineering college.
Is there one place, Holly, on the test where most kids it's the universally a weakness that you see pretty commonplace that they have to be beefed up?
Actually, two places, but they're all within the reading section, ironically. It's almost entirely vocabulary. Universally, the American vocabulary is pretty tragic. Not a surprise. But the actual reading passages, you just wouldn't think people would be cowed by them, but they are. They are flummoxed. They look at these things, they read them. They're not complex. It's not complex writing. They're not long. They're a half of a page. And because the SAT has a tendency to ask questions that are very general, and the answers tend to be a little general too. It's very much gray area. People cannot wrap their head around the concept of gray area. And where sort of American schools teach that it's black or white. You answer the answer was 2, and if you didn't get 2, it's not right. In the same way that the answer on Shakespeare is this, and that's the only right answer. And so what happens is you get a lot of people who have great difficulty with it. That's the biggest thing.
So what do you do to then prepare them for the SAT to look for those gray areas? How can they work on that?
You teach them about the color gray. You teach them what gray areas are, and you teach them the art of inexact thinking, of looking at 5 choices, looking at the big picture, looking at 5 choices, using your common sense, which we're all imbued with, and then saying, all right, 2 of these answers are the most ridiculous, ludicrous answers. To get these answers, you would have to have not even read the passage. And then of the 3 left, one's just flat out wrong and the opposite of what everyone's been saying. And the last 2, you used your judgment call and sort of stand back and just use common sense. And that's all it is. But a lot of people can't imagine a test that would live in that space.
What's Greg? This was for you.
What are the biggest
Safety, so-
myths when it comes to getting financial aid, how much financial aid is available, and who actually qualifies for it? That's 3 different questions.
Yeah. So there's 2 different types of financial aid. There's the merit and there's need-based. I think a very big misconception is that a lot of families think that need-based aid only goes to the needy, and that's not necessarily the case. So we have absolutely no pure merit scholarships. I mean, just because you could argue that everybody that got into Carnegie Mellon is worthy of a merit scholarship, and to be honest, that's par for the course for a lot of the more selective schools. Merit scholarships have kind of gone the way of the dodo, but we understand that a $65,000 a year investment is a huge investment, and that even a family that on paper looks like they have decent wealth would struggle in making that payment. So we actually have scholarships that if you don't qualify for need-based aid, but you can't afford 2 Carnegie Mellons a year, that you're in the running for what can be pretty substantial aid. So once you fall into that category, then it looks at merit. So it's merit within the context of need. So I think the best piece of advice with financial aid is it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission. So if you're unsure, just apply for financial aid. And schools do keep money in their back pocket waiting for families to ask. I mean, it's like the child-parent relationship. If you don't ask your dad for money, he's not going to just give you a $50 bill. If you ask him for 50, though, he might give you 20. So I think
And a lot of parents think they make too much money
oh, they really do.
to do that. Newland was surprised today.
Yeah.
Scott got a scholarship at Duquesne.
Yeah. Oh, congratulations.
Because there were so many, there are endowments
Yeah.
and whatever that are put aside for various kids
Yeah.
that you really got to be aggressive and got to ask.
Yeah, you do. You do. And I think there's a misconception too, is it's linked to endowment. Carnegie Mellon is probably the poorest kid at the country club, so to speak. Where we have $1 billion endowment, which is great, but that's not earmarked for financial aid in any substantial amount. So when you're talking to schools, it's not necessarily the size of the endowment that's linked to the amount of
Where does the
financial
financial
aid.
aid
That
come from?
it's linked to the endowment. So either it's the ability to borrow against it, or some schools actually do draw down directly from the endowment. But the Carnegie Mellon has made the conscious effort to invest more back into the university. Where if you have a school like Harvard that's been around for 400 years and $65 billion, they don't need to really invest a whole lot more into the university. And then they have a much, much larger financial aid budget that they can draw down from.
And there was a recent article in the Wall Street Journal where that stated we are actually going into, and maybe you can confirm this, a period where we've got a declining college population, where admissions will actually be falling, and colleges, certain ones, maybe not CMU, will have to become more competitive about trying to get students, and therefore it's turned into sort of an awards race, and it might behoove you, even if you don't think you apply for financial aid, to do so.
Oh, it definitely could. So there are a lot of schools out there that they discount their tuition for 100% of the students that will apply to that particular institution, regardless of their demonstrated net worth. So we discount for maybe about 36, 37% of the students, just because being in the position that we're in, we're rather fortunate where we're going to fill our class without having to discount the price. But there are a lot of schools out there that they are not able to survive, especially with the increase in what are called MOOCs, massive online open courses, where, you know, if you want to be an engineer, you have to be certified to be an engineer. If you want to be a successful business person, there are a lot of people in the business world that don't have college degrees, and it's an opportunity to learn a little bit about the material without having to get the actual degree. And just online programs as well. I mean, there are some great schools out there that Drexel University right now, every single one of their programs is available online. They don't necessarily need the brick and mortar institutions anymore. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. Apply for financial aid, because something else that's not advertised is once you're admitted, your bargaining power goes through the roof. So if you're admitted to Carnegie Mellon and Case Western, if you have a better financial aid offer from Case Western, even if we didn't offer you anything, you can send that in to us and use that. We won't match it, but it's, hey, I have another offer, and, you know, is there anything that we can do here? And it's not a guarantee that it'll work, but better than not having an offer, I guess. Yeah.
Any other questions? Because I don't want to be hogging the show.
So what is up with those Drexel University? Like we see those, but you know, my friend got a degree from online, but I think people they don't look at that as like real degrees. So what my kids, we have our own business, so neither one of them want to go to college right now. They think they're just going to take over our business, and we're trying to get them both into college. One hates school, hates it every day. You know, I think like maybe online college would be something for her, but I don't know what, you know, where to go with that. Is it real? Do people, can you get a job when you say I went to online college? I don't know where we are.
That's a good question.
That's a great question, and there's a difference in online education. There's for-profit institutions, and then there's the not-for-profit institutions. So, especially in Pittsburgh right now, there's a huge company called EDMC, Argosy University, and University of Phoenix, which do offer degrees, but they are for-profit institutions. How employers are going to look at those, honestly, I'm not 100% sure. That's kind of out of my jurisdiction. But I can tell you right now, the Drexel program, for example, your degree says Drexel University. You walk at graduation with the Drexel students. You'd be amazed at some of the schools that are offering these distance learning programs. At the graduate level, even Harvard offers programs where you can learn remotely, and you spend, I think it's 4 weeks a year on their campus. So that's the one condition. You have to go, you spend 4 weeks on campus, but everything else is done remotely. Penn does the same kind of thing for master's programs. They might even have it at the undergraduate level at this point. So if it's a non-for-profit university and they have online programs, your degree says Drexel University. It does not say Drexel Online University. What the data will show you, though, is there's an issue with motivation. So when you have a set class and you have a roommate that's in the same class as you, it's easy to get up and go to that class. When you're entirely responsible for your learning at your own pace, it can be a little tricky at times.
I'm going to pick up on that because we often get asked, is it worth doing a couple of years in community college to offset the cost of a degree. So my child will go to community college for 2 years and then finish up the final 2 years on campus. And what studies have shown is that it actually takes longer to get the degree, or they don't wind up going at all because of the lack of motivation.
For us, that's 100% true. Are open to accepting transfer students from community colleges, but what ends up happening is it takes 2 community college classes to equal one of our classes. So if you have a student that does 2 years at community, they're not going to get out in 2 years from Carnegie Mellon. But that's us. So there are some schools that will definitely do the 2-2 program. So.
But then there are also a lot of schools that won't accept the credits at all, so you need to check. Any other questions from anyone? So how, yeah.
I'm talking to parents all the time about this. What's the biggest mistake or the biggest misconception for parents in general about not only financing college, the SATs or whatever? I'm amazed at how many, and I was the same way. I had all these preconceived notions about how certain things worked and everything else. I mean, some of the things you've said tonight, like if you get an offer from one school, bring it up to the other school. I think very few people know that, but what's a mistake they make? They say, well, yeah, I know this is true, but it really isn't.
Yeah.
There's actually an answer to that? Because I'm just throwing that out there.
There's a great answer to that. Tax law and financial aid law are 2 completely separate things. What makes sense for what you might put on your taxes might not make sense for financial aid purposes. And a great example is small business owners that set up their corporation as an S corp. Where your adjusted gross income is artificially high. In the world of financial aid, we are using your adjusted gross income. Even if it's artificially high due to the way you set up your corporation, that's what we're using. You might not have access to 60% of your adjusted gross income, but it's still going to be factored into the equation. So I would say if you're planning for college, to really, really simplify things, your adjusted gross income and your federal taxes paid are the 2 big numbers off of your tax return that we are going to use in calculating financial aid. Now, there's asset information and imputed value of the home and so on and so forth, but from an income standpoint, it is really those 2 numbers that drive the process.
Interesting. Paul, is it worth, when you talked about doing the PSAT, dipping your toe in the water, if you find out, what would be a score that would tell you my child needs to be tutored, and what would be a score that says my child seems to have this under control and as long as they're studying? And how much studying do you recommend kids do before the SAT?
Okay, so that question is, the beginning of that question, though, is quite complex because it depends what your end game is. I mean, if you're looking at Harvard and your child has 600 across the board, you need tutoring. If you have a kid who wants to go Penn State main campus, you have 600 across the board, you may not need tutoring. It's so situation specific. So you're really talking about what your end game is, what your target school is. Do you have an athlete who's going to get a little extra pop anyhow just from being a great athlete? You may not need the same scores that you would need if it's just your student. If they're hungry for you, University of North Carolina has taken you with your 550 across the board in each one, because you fill a slot they can't fill anywhere else. So that one's very touchy. It's just, you have to think about what the end game is, how far you have to climb. So I tell my people, find out what you need. If you are 150 below that, you're probably going to have to see somebody. You may not have to see them for that long, but you need to at least seek some help. What was the second half? How many hours? Again, it depends how much you have to go up and what your learning style is. I mean, if you've got somebody who's a slow learner who panics on tests, and certainly I've got a lot of those people who panic on tests, it's a fine dance. I would say the average tends to be for the SATs, you probably need to put about 8 1.5-hour sessions in. If you're on the ACTs, it's more like 4 1.5-hour sessions, and then a bunch of just run-throughs on tests for your own sake to try and get your speed up. But at about 6 or 7 times through the ACT as practice, you've probably maximized your speed on that. You probably hit as much lift as you're going to get.
How do you get them over the panic threshold?
That is really hard. It's really hard. I just had a girl who was a valedictorian of a very, very, very difficult school in Delaware. And she was one of probably the brightest people I've ever met. She wants to be a journalist. Her writing is exquisite. And she has perfect scores on everything, and goes into a dead panic, and was getting in the 500s on SATs, which if you now know what this seems like, it's absolutely a terrifying combination. And no matter what I did, I couldn't talk her off the ledge. I couldn't get her down, and I usually can get anyone down. She ended up at Georgetown. It's a happy ending, in the School of Foreign Service. Amazing, amazing girl. Some of that came from family connection and having a building built there. I mean, it's just, that's gonna push that. But she probably would have gone in without it because she's just such an amazing student. A lot of it is taking the pressure off, making it into a game. And you really have to see these as they're just a piece of the puzzle. They're not everything. Like he was saying, what you did for 4 years in school, that is your very most important thing. What passions you have. Are you an athlete? Do you have something you love doing outside of school? What's that? That's really important. But the test scores can come in the second. I tell people it's like a piece of pie. A second piece of that pie, and the second most important tends to be those test scores. So treat it like a game. Make it a family activity. Make it something kind of funny. Joke about it. Have a good time with it. It seems like, oh my God, joking about SATs, really? But it makes the difference. If you keep it light, the person who panics doesn't get in that same spot.
And Greg, since you brought up building the building, how important is a legacy or a family provider? Say that my child wanted to go to my alma mater, but maybe didn't get great SAT scores, was a decent student, had some really interesting activities outside of school. Is that connection powerful enough to get my child in?
Definitely depends on the alum. Yeah.
Do you recommend the building?
Yeah, the building helps. Yeah. Yeah, that probably helped out a lot.
It's not the first one who's been through
Yeah.
it either, which is really alarming.
But I mean, as long the whole Michigan Supreme Court case that kind of dealt with affirmative action and wrestled around this issue is, as long as the student's considered to be admissible, we can use any factor that we want to admit a student. We just can't use it universally across that group. So can I advantage an alum because they're an alum? Absolutely. Can we advantage all alums? No, but they have to fall within that admissible range. Most schools consider the legacy connection to be mom, dad, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, siblings. Doesn't really come into play a whole lot. But if you have a family connection to the university, you should absolutely talk about that family connection because it's not going to hurt you. It can only help you.
It's one thing to get your kid in college, but that first year is perilous. A lot of instant freedom they're not used to, and a lot of kids just can't handle it, and they wash out. What do you see as far as what parents can kind of do to tell their kids to make sure once they've made that big investment, they get them into college, that they stick? Because sometimes it's hard to stick.
So I would actually say, too, when you're looking for colleges, the best question, a lot of parents ask, what's your graduation rate? Don't worry about the graduation rate. Everybody's graduation rate, for the most part, is about the same. It's in that 70 to 80% over 6 years. The best question you can ask is, what's the freshman to sophomore year retention rate? How many freshmen are actually coming back as sophomores? And you'd be surprised at how much that varies. I mean, we're at about 96 or 97%, but we're a pretty niche school. I mean, people are picking us specifically because of the programs that we offer. So I would say the student has to realize that they're, quote, not kind of too cool for school and take advantage of the resources that are available. Every school has an orientation. Every school has RAs. Every school has faculty members or faculty level positions that are going to help acclimate you to the school. The student needs to take advantage of that. If the student takes advantage of the resources that are available to them, they will have more people looking out for them at school than they do at home. So the resources are there. They just have to use them.
Yes, Joe.
So my question's for Greg.
Yeah.
So when you look at an incoming class, do you have like a overall profile that you're looking at and then like little buckets?
Yes.
And you try to fill up all those little buckets so you get a well-rounded incoming class? And what can my daughter do to take advantage of that?
Yeah, you're absolutely. So we do have buckets, but we don't have set numbers that we want in those buckets. So we want a diverse class in all of its definition. I mean, we want students we currently have students from all 50 states. Our North Dakota student is a senior. And if you don't think we're going to pay special attention to students from North Dakota, we absolutely are, because we want students from all 50 states. We want athletes, we want high socioeconomic, we want low socioeconomic, we want every ethnicity, we want students from around the world. So when we're admitting, we're kind of keeping all that in mind, that again, we don't want every student to be well-rounded. We want the class as a whole to be well-rounded.
Find out.
There's not, because that well-roundedness comes from the fact that we have 45 people that read applications, and every 45 person, you like that English? We're not great at English, huh? So all 45 people are reading applications underneath the overarching umbrella of the values of the university, but then it's up to each reader to figure out how to interpret those values. So I would say in your specific case, Pennsylvania is our 4th largest feeder state. So we don't get many students from the Pittsburgh city schools or even the schools within Pittsburgh. That is going to help in the admission process. We pay a lot of special attention to local students.
I was going to ask, walk us through the admissions process, sort of like we're opening the door on the top secret club. Do you guys,
Videotape to the world.
yeah, do you sit down with these applications? Do you each have a pile, or do you each have a pile from a certain region, and you put them in a bucket, and then everybody comes to the room with their bucket, and then you present them and say walk us through that process.
So every school is going to have a different process. I can tell you there's no big oak table. I don't own a tweed jacket with a leather patch. There's no thumbs up, thumbs down.
Really, no jacket?
No tweed, no bow ties, no tweed jacket, thumb up, thumb down. We don't read by territory at Carnegie Mellon, so a lot of schools will have regional territories. Even the Ivies, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, the big 3, they have territories. We'll talk more about that in a second. We read applications by college. So I sit on the computer science committee. You apply to computer science. It's my team of maybe 10 people. We are going to get assigned those applications, and they're done electronically. So somebody will read an application and they pass it on to a second person. So every application gets touched at least twice, sometimes 3 times, but all 10 of us on the committee are not going to see that one application. So that's how we do it. But then if you go to the Ivies, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, your regional rep, so if you're thinking about applying to any of the Ivies, your regional rep evaluates your application. So for them, you absolutely should try and get some FaceTime with them. They read your application and then they present it to the committee if they feel that you're worthy to have it presented to the committee. So, and then the committee is undergrad students, graduate students, faculty, staff, the dean of admission, and they sit around a table. Your rep puts it on the screen and they vote. So the dean of admission gets 1 vote, and whatever undergrad is on that committee gets 1 vote. You have enough votes, you're in. You don't, you're out. So every school's curtain is going to be a little bit different. But for the most part, it's not like in the movies where we sit around and have big philosophical debates about how they're going to add to the overall university.
Any questions so far? Holly, I know you work on essays as well for a lot of students, because that gets part of the conversation, and also where would I be a good fit? Since the essay is so important to this whole process, do you have any advice or tips for parents about what their kids should write about? Because I know most people come to you and they're like, I have no clue.
So what he was saying about every single person writes that they solved world hunger over the summer, they worked in a lab and split the atom, and everybody does this. I literally have had students apply to MIT where they are making this big deal about working in a lab and at Penn and making it sound like they published a report. No, they filed for a guy who published a report. And everybody at MIT who reads it knows it. What they want actually is to see you, because this is their only opportunity to see you in your truest light. And so what makes you you? And maybe it's you collect paper clips and it's the best thing ever. You have 5,000 paper clips from around the world. You're really interesting now. If you worked for Habitat for Humanity or worked in a lab, you are not interesting, because there are 10 million people claiming the same thing. So really, you want to talk about yourself and what makes you special. And it could be, for instance, one of my Stanford guys, and again, bright guy, had all the numbers, everything else, but he's a regular guy. He wrote about how he spent a year dressed as Batman when he was 5, and it was one of the best essays I've ever read. I mean, it was just poetic. So you really want to get at you, like what makes you different? What are your quirks? What's your fun bit? If you're super passionate about something, write about that super passion. If you're not, hey, most high school students in America are actually not super passionate about something. But what then makes you unique? What makes you special? What makes you happy and puts a smile on your face at the end of the day? These are the great essays. They're not the ones that claim, like my first one where I wrote about designing a program for the Philadelphia Zoo. And I thought that was going to be the best essay ever. And my mother, who worked as a journalist, proofed it, rewrote it, we sent it in, and when I read it now, it's like a bad PR release. I look at it and no 18-year-old would have written it. And then when I bagged out on school, I blew off all the schools I was supposed to go to, reapplied, and I was the person that goes against his type, where I hadn't really put in a lot of work on my studies. I'd done okay, but I was not number one in my class, but I did have really good SAT scores. And I wrote an essay about Winnie the Pooh being a social commentary, and it was supposed to be about what your summer reading was. That was the prompt. It was just different. Everybody else was writing about War and Peace. So be different, be yourself, be authentic, and own who you are. And I think that's the compelling story. It's not the story that's expected. It's the cool story.
To add on that real quick, so much emphasis is put on the essays, which it should be, but a lot of colleges ask short answer questions. And the reason it's very intentional that we do that is because your essay is going to be proofread by everybody 10 times. Those short answers, students are oftentimes writing from the hip because they're like, it's 150 words, who's going to read it? We had a kid one year that ours at the time was, what's your favorite activity? And he said, well, that's easy. My favorite activity is I love torturing kids. We take them down in the basement. I torture kids year round. He meant to say tutor, but spell check, it was torture was spelled right, but he never caught it. And increasingly, more and more schools are tracking demonstrated interest. So the more interested you are in that school, the more interested they become in you. And two great examples, Columbia has a question on their application that says, tell us the last 4 books that you read and which one impacted you the most, and they list the question as optional. Ask yourself why one of the most selective schools in the country would have an optional question on the application. Because if you can't take the time to answer the question, they're not going to take you. Because how interested are you really in Columbia if you can't be bothered to write 150 words on your favorite book? And if schools send you, so Lehigh, I can talk about this because Lehigh made national news for this. When you apply to Lehigh, and most schools, they send you, it's called an application receipt letter that says, hey, we got your application. Here's a number and a website. Log onto this website, put in your number, and you can check the status of your application. If Lehigh, when they check, if you've never logged onto that website, they won't take you. So the more interested you are in that school, the better it is for you. So essays are important, but every question on the essay, no matter, or on the application, no matter how minor it is, answer it and spend a lot of time doing your due diligence.
And log on to the website 30 times a day. 30 times a day.
We don't
But
do
if
that.
Lehigh,
We don't do more than that. There you go.
So that brings up something I'd not heard of until recently, this common application.
Yeah.
How does that, do you guys use it? How does that work? And obviously I only heard about it because it failed last year or the year before and nobody's essays got in on time. But I was just wondering how that works really.
Well, it didn't fail. They took their lumps, but it ultimately ended up working out. So there's about 400 schools in the United States that use the Common App. So it's one application that you fill out, and it's predominantly biographical information. The biographical information gets sent to every school that you are interested in. I think you can list up to 10, 15 schools. And then each college will have what's referred to as member questions. So you fill out the Common application, you say I'm interested in Carnegie Mellon, and then when you go to this tab, it's called the member screen tab, our specific questions are on that tab. So Carnegie Mellon, actually, we don't have our own application. We rely entirely on the Common application. So schools that use the Common App have to agree to a holistic approach. So we have to look at SATs, GPA, as well as involvement outside of the classroom. A lot of the larger state schools are not on the Common App because they do this thing called the academic index factor, and every school will calculate that academic index differently. They look at your SATs, they look at your GPA, essays are optional, recommendations are optional. They look at your zip code, they look at other factors, and then they put it into an algorithm that spits out a number. If that number's above the bar, you're in. If you're below the bar, you're out, regardless of essays, recommendations. Because of that, they can't use the Common App because they haven't agreed to that holistic approach.
Interesting.
I have a question about letters of recommendation. So, would you recommend getting them from like a teacher from a subject that has to do with the major, or like a teacher that you had a really good relationship with?
Yes.
That isn't like if it was like my religion teacher, say.
It's a great question.
She's very smart.
I got a letter of recommendation one time from a U.S. senator with paper that was like a half an inch thick with a gold bung, gold leaf on top, and it said, "I highly recommend insert name here." Insert name here it was a form letter, and somebody in that guy's office screwed up and forgot to put in the student's name. So don't try and impress us with who's writing the recommendation, impress us with what they're saying. So you can submit as many letters of recommendation as you want. Please be gentle, okay, because we do read all these things, but you should only send additional recommendations if they're going to tell your story from a different point of view. If you ask for a letter of recommendation from a teacher and they say, "Can I see your transcript and a resume?" just pick somebody else, because all they're going to do is put that in paragraph form. Somebody that knows you goes a long way, but if you're applying to engineering, like you said, it would be nice to see somebody from your physics or calculus class, if at all possible. Let's submit the religion one as well.
And just to piggyback off of that, who should you be going after for these letters of recommendation other than teachers? Can you make some suggestions on who you'd like to see?
Anybody that knows you. So my all-time favorite letter of recommendation was from a young lady. She was a babysitter. She had the 5-year-old girl that she babysits for write the letter of recommendation. It was on construction paper with red magic mark. It was adorable. No, don't send that to us. Send that to somebody else. But seriously, I mean, those kind of things are great because it's showing your personality, and no teacher can tell us how good you are at scaring away the boogeyman, right? Oh, hopefully, right? So, but that's a unique point of view that we can't see anywhere else.
That's a great example. Any other questions from you guys? Great. Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for coming in. I hope that you got more from it.